Hi, friends. I'm John Kempf, hosting this podcast. I am passionate about developing regenerative agriculture systems that improve soil health, produce crops that are completely resistant to diseases and insects, and produce fruit of such an exceptional quality that we can have a legitimate conversation about growing food as medicine. I've discovered that there are many people with incredible knowledge and information about soil and plant systems and how to develop regenerative agriculture systems. However, much of this knowledge and this information is scattered. It's found all over the place. Some of it has been published in peer-reviewed publications, but there are many incredible stories and a lot of knowledge that has not been published and that hasn't been shared with many people. I started Advancing Eco-Agriculture in 2006 to bring this knowledge together in a more coherent fashion and incorporate it into products and growing systems that growers can easily put into practice. It's my personal mission to have these regenerative agricultural systems become adopted globally and become the mainstream, the status quo, against which all other growing systems are compared. To help achieve this goal, I want to share the knowledge that we have learned in the last decade and make it available to everyone. While we have developed products at AEA that embody the principles of regenerative agriculture systems and make them easier for growers to apply, this knowledge and these principles can be applied anywhere. And when they are applied properly, they will always increase farm profitability and resilience to climate stress. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, or ideas, topics that you would like for me to discuss, please connect on LinkedIn or on Twitter, where my username is @visionbuilder7, or you can also email me at john@johnkempf.com. I would very much like to hear from you and to hear your feedback. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast, and thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the show.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast. On this podcast, we explore the science and practical application of regenerative agriculture ecosystems and talk about how to regenerate soil and crop health and quality and how to increase farm profitability. In this episode, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Lynn Long to our show. Lynn is extremely well known in the sweet cherry industry, where he has worked for several decades in evaluating varieties, looking at different rootstock, looking at different pruning systems, and has done some exceptional work in the space. Lynn, we're very excited to have you with us.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to be here.
Lynn, you have done some exceptional work over the decades working with sweet cherries. What are some of the memorable moments and the highlights that led you to where you are today?
Well, I think I'd have to go back to the early 1990s. At that time, for those people that were in the sweet cherry industry, you know that most of the production in the United States was focused on one single sweet cherry variety. And that variety, of course, was Bing. And we grew our cherries on one rootstock, and that rootstock was Mazard. And we used one training system, which was kind of an open base. We were starting to transition into a training system that was developed by growers up in Washington State that was called a steep leader system. But, there wasn't a lot of diversity in the sweet cherry industry at that time. And in 1994, the cherry growers in the mid-Columbia area of Oregon, I work for Oregon State University, got together and sent me on a fact-finding mission to Europe. And what I saw over there changed the way that we farm cherries here in the United States. And so I think that probably was the one thing that has transformed my work in the sweet cherry industry more than anything else, and has transformed the industry here in the United States more than anything else.
What was the shift that happened? How did you begin managing trees differently?
Well, so it was interesting. So back in the 1970s, I started working for Oregon State University in 1988, 30 years ago. And prior to my starting my tenure with OSU, we were in the experiment stations at Oregon State University and Washington State University. We were testing new cherry rootstocks. And so we were looking at some of them that had been developed in Europe, a series that was developed in Oregon, but nobody was thinking about moving that from the experimental stage into the commercial stage. Same thing was true for varieties, although with varieties, nobody was even looking at other options. We had Bing, For blush variety, we had Rainier, and basically that was it. Nobody was looking any further than that. And the problem was that if something happened to destroy your Bing crop the day before you were going to pick it, your entire income for that year was wiped out. If you had rain, for example, the day or a week before you were going to pick the crop, you lost your crop and you moved on to the next year. And so there was good reasons for us to be looking at other varieties, but nobody was thinking about it at that time. And when I went to Europe, what I saw was that growers in Germany, for example, were using dwarfing rootstocks commercially. Growers in France were talking about the pedestrian orchards that could be harvested from the ground without the use of ladders. And our trees were, 20, 25 feet tall, using big ladders to harvest our cherries. And they were using, in places like Germany and Spain and France and Italy, they were using multiple varieties to harvest their cherries early, mid-season, and late, which also protected them from events like rain, because the cherries may be more resistant to rain cracking, some varieties more resistant than other varieties. Plus, if you get a rain early, your late season varieties are still pickable. And so when I came back and started talking to growers about some of these things and doing some research on these things, the training systems, varieties, and rootstocks, then all of a sudden the growers understood the need to move forward. And starting in the late 90s, there were some dramatic changes that happened in the cherry industry with all three of these areas.
When you think about each of these three areas, obviously they're an entire cultural management system that tie together. You have to use all three of these pieces together. One of the areas that I know many growers are becoming much more interested today is understanding how to manage plant health with these newer systems. In some parts of the country, I've heard the conversation that many of the newer genetics and newer varieties, particularly some of the dwarf rootstocks, don't seem to have the root vigor and strength and the capacity to absorb nutrients from the soil profile. I've not seen, we've observed some differences in various varieties being able to pick up nutrients more effectively than others, but they've been fairly slight. But I've never been able to compare with some of the older rootstocks. How do you feel the vigor of the modern dwarf rootstocks compares to the vigor of some of the older varieties that were available?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why some of our growers still prefer the older rootstocks, such as Mazard, which is a kind of a default rootstock here in the Pacific Northwest for cherry growers and has been for years and years, is because it's a rootstock that establishes itself well. It grows deep into the ground, so it pulls in nutrients from a wide-ranging area, and it grows a vigorous tree that fills a space quite quickly. So some of the dwarfing rootstocks, there's a series out of Germany called the Gisela series, produced dwarfing or semi-dwarfing trees, and their rootstocks are also a lot more shallow. So you've got to be sure that the nutrients are delivered to the root zone for uptake by the tree. You no longer have that huge bank of soil and nutrients that the cherry tree can naturally find by itself. And so you have to be thinking about these things a little bit more. You have to be thinking about delivering the nutrients to where the tree is, whether you're doing it through drip irrigation or a micro sprinkler system, because the tree is not going to be able to send its roots down to an area that can find all the nutrients that it might need in order to remain strong and healthy.
Earlier, you and I spoke a little bit about looking at the other half of the tree. What do you think has been missing in perhaps with varieties and genetic selection and also cultural management in terms of looking at the upper half of the tree and not at what's happening below the soil system?
Yeah, so I think that this is one of the key areas that I think we're going to be moving in the future, because up till now, we have been focusing our attention and our research, and growers have been focusing most of their management on just half of the tree, just from the ground up. And, when we talk about a cherry tree or talk about any type of a tree, what we're really talking about, at least what most people are thinking about, is what they can see. But there's a whole world of what's happening under the soil that we don't think about, that we are not actively managing, and we are not actively doing research on. Now, there are some exceptions to that. And I think that we're seeing more and more scientists doing research on that part of the tree that is below ground. What's happening below ground? What are the micronutrients that are supporting the growth of the tree? What are the microbes and the fauna that is going through its entire life cycle underneath the soil that is causing the tree to either be healthy or not to be healthy? And I think that growers, too, are starting to think about this more as a whole system rather than just a half a system, as we've been looking at this for decades and even centuries. And I think that's a really positive thing that is happening now, that more and more growers are thinking about the entire tree, and more scientists are thinking about the entire tree and not just the above ground portion of the tree.
Yeah, it's when you think about hormonal interactions and nutrient transport, nutrient absorption, etc., there's the root system plays a major part in the reproductive potential and other pieces that are happening within the tree canopy. What are some of the things that you've observed that caused that you started thinking about managing what's happening in the soil profile?
Well, when we are using these dwarfing rootstocks, a lot of them are fairly shallowly rooted. And so where you have a situation like what we have here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a Mediterranean climate. The summers are very hot. Our cherry industry in both Oregon and Washington is on the east side of the Cascade Mountain Range, which is more or less a desert to semi-desert location. And if you go out into an orchard in July, August, maybe even June, and you try to put a soil probe into the soil, it's like concrete. You can hardly get that soil probe to penetrate into that soil. And when you have dwarfing rootstocks, and those roots are so shallow in the soil, you've got this soil that is so hard and impenetrable. That's got to be affecting the growth and the behavior of the tree. Plus, we see that a couple of these rootstocks, Gisela 5 and Gisela 6, a couple of these German rootstocks that I was mentioning earlier, when the temperatures get really hot, when you get temperatures like 100 degrees or more, which happens several times a year in this climate, the leaves look stressed. They look wilted. And again, that's got to be affecting the quality of the fruit. The tree is going to try to protect itself. And so it will take moisture from wherever it can find it. If it can't bring it up from the root zone in order to counter the translocation that's taking place from the leaves, it's going to take it from the fruit. And that's got to affect fruit quality. So from there, I got to thinking about, there's got to be some way that we can protect this soil from the heat and from the drying that takes place in the middle of the summer. And maybe we should be thinking about mulches. And then we thought that kind of developed into looking at compost and compost mulch mixtures. And from there, there's a lot that we don't know yet, but from there we started realizing that if we can keep the soil friable and moist at the surface, then there's a possibility that we can keep the microorganisms alive in that level of soil throughout the entire year. And by doing that, that's got to affect the health of the entire ecosystem, including the health of the tree. And so that's kind of, my thought processes over the last few years as we've been thinking about not only what's happening above ground, but also in the entire ecosystem of the tree.
So what have you learned so far with the emulsion and compost trials? What has stood out for you?
Right now, we are in the middle of a multi-year study, and we're just at the beginning process of that study. So scientific data I can't share with you, but we certainly have some observations where we have seen some orchards that have been struggling, have turned around. Leaves that were small and chlorotic have started to grow larger leaves, better color. And what's causing that, what's having that positive effect, we don't know yet. I think that we are being successful at keeping the microorganisms alive throughout the season, the summer season, as well as through the rest of the year. We're taking some of the stress out of the tree by keeping the soil cooler. And so I think it's just a whole positive change that is being made to the entire ecosystem of the tree, and not just relying on the moisture that we've been giving them through the irrigation system, through the fertilizer that we've been applying to them. But now we're looking at, okay, how do we add organic matter to the soil by using some of these organic mulches, organic compost? How does that affect the overall health of our trees? Those are some of the questions that we have yet to answer. And like I mentioned earlier, scientists are just beginning to look at some of these questions and get answers for them. But I'm happy to see that more and more scientists are finally asking these questions.
Yeah, I think it's certainly interesting. In a recent discussion, a microbiologist made the point that in her estimation, we know less than 5% of what is going on in the soil underneath our feet. And I certainly respect that viewpoint, that it's something that we don't understand very well, and we don't understand the full implications of how biology interact with plant roots and how they might have the capacity to affect the crop that we're growing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I just returned from a trip to Chile on Sunday, a couple of days ago. I've been working with some growers down there and encouraging them to use compost and mulches. And last year in Chile, they had a very heavy cherry crop, to the point where some trees weren't harvested, some blocks weren't harvested because the cherries were just overset and they were too small. But I've been working with one grower down there who I encouraged to put on some compost and mulches, and he attributed the vigor in his trees that I saw there. Now, that you got to remember that they harvest their cherries in December and January. So now they're just going into the fall. So I was looking at trees that were dormant, that were dropping their leaves or had dropped their leaves. And yet in some of these trees that typically you would not have expected to see any growth because the fruit load was so heavy in the tree, they had nice, long, vigorous shoots. And he attributed that to the fact that he had been using compost and mulch through the year, and that made that kind of difference. Now, whether or not that was true or not, I can't say. I don't have any data to back that up, but I'm just relaying to you the observations and the comments that the grower made to me.
That's intriguing, and that would correlate with some of the things we've observed in other orchards that we've worked with. In the work that you have done, or the operations that you have observed in your, I guess perhaps I'll just say in your life experience, what has been something that surprised you?
Well, I think that one of the things that has surprised me, and yet I appreciate very much about the grower community, is that wherever I travel in the world, cherry growers are willing to share ideas with each other. Occasionally you find somebody who, thinks that they have all the secrets, and they don't want to share those secrets with anybody else. But for the most part, wherever I've traveled in the world, growers have been willing to share ideas and share what they're doing with other growers, with scientists. And I think that's just a really nice thing about this industry. We have growers from all over the world that come here, and our growers are willing to invite them into their orchard and show them around, show them new ideas and techniques that they're working on. And, that's just really nice to be a part of that type of industry that is open and is willing to share ideas, but also receive ideas from other people. And I think that's one of the reasons why the cherry industry has advanced so much in the last 20 years.
I think you've just identified a very key piece when what we have observed and what I've observed around the countryside is the growers who are the most willing to share ideas are also the same growers. I guess perhaps the simplest way to say it is that you receive in the same measure that you give. you share ideas and share information with other growers, almost invariably you learn things that can help you on your operation as well. And I would agree with you that that is something that is very pronounced in the agriculture space in general and very valuable.
Yeah, and I think that and I guess I would encourage growers, professionals that are listening to this, I think the more traveling you can do to see what's happening around the world. I started off by talking about how that one trip to Europe back in 1994 changed an entire industry in the Northwest and really throughout the entire country. And since then, there's been a lot of our growers that have gone to other parts of the world, and a lot of growers from places like Australia and Chile and Argentina and even from Europe that have come here and just look at what we're doing, and we look at what they're doing. And the grower community is really a very hospitable community. And I've seen it where they've invited people to come. They've had barbecues for people. They share ideas. And it's the same with the scientific community as well. I'll go up to Canada and visit research stations up there. They'll come down here, or I'll go to Germany, or I'll go to Australia and visit with their scientists, and they come here and visit with us. And this is how we advance. This is how we move forward, and we learn from each other. We learn what doesn't work. We learn what they're doing that has worked. We put that together with our ideas, and with that, then we advance. And I think that's the only way that we advance.
Exactly. One of the pieces that I've observed, which I find really intriguing, is everyone has a unique perspective on the work that they're doing and the things that are happening in the world around them. And along those lines, one of the questions that I'd have for you is, what is something that you believe to be true about modern agriculture that is perhaps a different perspective from the mainstream?
I think that probably the most important thing we've already talked about. I think the mainstream agriculture has focused on, as we mentioned, just half of the tree, half of the plant. And I think that what is true is that there is a lot more that's going on out there than what we realize. What that is, we're just starting to learn. But there is much more happening below the soil surface than we've ever thought of before, we've ever realized before. It's great to, talk about pruning this tree, about how we train the tree and all of that, about the irrigation needs of the tree, about the fertilizer needs of the tree, about putting on foliar fertilizers, whatever that might be. But there is so much more to growing the tree than we have understood up to now. And there's a whole world out there of science that we're just beginning to penetrate. I think that if we look forward in the next 20 years, I think that the changes from now, the next 20 years, are going to be just as dramatic as the changes that happened to the cherry industry back in the mid-90s to what we're looking at now. But it's going to be in a different area. It's going to be from the ground down and not from the ground up, like we focused on previously.
Those are some fascinating and intriguing comments. I guess the one question that comes to mind immediately is, how do you think, if we manage what is happening below the soil differently, how might that influence or change the way we manage what is happening above the soil?
I think it might change things dramatically, significantly. I think that there may be issues that we are struggling with now that may become minor issues in the future. And what I'm thinking of is, if you've ever grown any prunus species trees like cherries, you know that bacterial canker is one of the banes of the cherry industry. One of the reasons why the cherry industry in the United States is located on the Pacific coast, or Washington, Oregon, and California, is because we have dry summers. And bacterial canker is a disease that comes in and infects trees and can kill entire branches and eventually entire trees by girdling off the above ground portion of the branch or the trunk. And really, there is no good cure. It's a disease that affects cherry trees, peach trees, apricot trees, all the prunus species around the world. So if you go to Chile, they're struggling with the same thing. You go to California, they're struggling with it. You come to Oregon, we struggle with it here, and especially where it is where they have a lot more rain in the summertime. That's where we have problems with bacterial canker. But I think that by getting the microorganisms to work for us to keep the trees stronger and healthier, I think that is going to be in the future one of the things that helps us to solve this problem that we have been struggling with for centuries. And in the future, we may not have such issues as bacterial canker, at least not as severely as what we've had to deal with in recent history, where, for example, in the Hood River Valley of Oregon, which is it's a little bit wetter climate than what we have in the Dalles, where I live and work, we've lost up to 60% of some trees in orchards because of this single disease. But if we can get the microorganisms in the soil to work for us, keep those trees healthier, I mean, this is all speculation at this point in time, but it's something to think about, that this, again, may change the entire industry.
Yeah, actually, I have a follow-up question to that. But before I go there, one of the pieces that I have wondered is, as the root system begins changing, if we develop a much more aggressive root system, and a root system that is colonized by plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, beneficial fungi and bacteria, etc., how might that change the way the canopy expresses itself? Is there a possibility we might get a lot more growth? Is there a possibility we might need to consider adapting pruning and canopy management practices and so forth? Do you have any thoughts or ideas around that?
Yeah, I think that anytime you have a healthy root system that is exploring a wider area, it means that the nutrients that tree needs are more readily available, that the moisture that tree needs is more readily available, even in times when we have 100-degree weather, where that Gisela 6 rootstock tree is stressed. Now, if the rootstocks are growing more vigorously because of a healthier ecosystem, then it's going to help keep that tree from being stressed. It also means that there's going to be more vigor in that tree. In a situation where the soil is marginal, it may mean that we can now grow healthy trees in that soil that can produce high quality fruit. We weren't able to do that before. It might also mean that you're right, that we may have to adapt our training systems, our pruning methods, or maybe we would develop new rootstocks. There's a new series, rootstock series coming out that will be available very soon from Michigan State University called the Correct series. And this is a series of rootstocks that's even more dwarfing than what we are currently using here in the Northwest. And rootstocks like these may be the future of the cherry industry if we can get the roots to establish well, to grow, to be healthy, and that will also cause the tree to be healthy and to grow as well. I always tell growers that I like to see at least 2 feet of growth on all of the new shoots throughout the entire tree. So at the bottom of the tree, at the top of the tree. So it's easy to do that in the top of the tree, but down at the bottom of the tree, it can be difficult sometimes. But if we have that root system working for us because the microorganisms are working for us, then we're more able to get that shoot growth that we need throughout the entire tree and get high quality fruit throughout the entire tree, not just on the top of the tree.
One of the pieces that we've observed is that as nutrition management practices change, growers are able to get that consistent growth, but also to get very high quality growth with tight internode spacing. And I think there are many ways that nutrition and biology and genetics, they all tie together and they need to be managed. You mentioned the key word several times, which is we're really managing an entire ecosystem. We can't just manage one aspect of it. We have to manage the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, we need to be looking at the entire ecosystem and not just a portion of the ecosystem.
I understand your hesitation around speaking about some of I know that we've worked together on some orchards where we've seen some interesting things around bacterial canker. And so I'll just mention them briefly. One farm that we've worked on And when I say we, I'm referring to advancing eco-agriculture, where the incidence of bacterial canker has been greatly reduced. I think to the point where now, after several years, we can say that it seems to have been eliminated on a couple of blocks. And many growers have asked the question, well, what did you do? And what happened? What product did you use? And the answer, as Lynn has pointed out so well, is that we don't know. We worked with nutrition products, we worked with biological products, and we tried to manage that ecosystem. And as the ecosystem changed, then bacterial canker pressure changed. And we can't point to one thing and say that we did one thing that made a difference. So I agree with you that there seems to be the potential to shift that disease in particular, and perhaps others as well, which would be really exceptional.
Yeah, bacterial canker is a disease that is pretty relentless. Once it gets into the tree, occasionally you'll find that a canker will dry up and will not progress any further. But much more typically, is that canker, once it's established, will continue to grow and expand and eventually either kill part of the tree or all of the tree. And so when this grower approached me, and he mentioned that he was having a severe infection with bacterial canker. Well, you think about all your common remedies for bacterial canker, and like I say, there's really no very effective chemical that you can apply on that tree that is going to stop an infection once it's taken place. There's really nothing. You can help prevent infections using some products. One in particular would be copper, but even that's not all that effective. And so when I saw this, there was lots of infection, strikes all over these trees, and it really did not bode well for the future of that block. And then they started to do some of these things we've been talking about, using compost and mulches in that orchard, and using some of the AEA products. And again, as I've mentioned before, we can't point a finger to any scientific data that says this turned it around. All we have is observations. But after the first year, he came back to me and said, those cankers have dried up. And this was in the summertime. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, they don't look like they're progressing any further. But these cankers do go dormant in the summertime. Let's see what they look like in the fall, what they look like in the spring. And we'll make a better assessment at that time. Well, the next spring came around, and the next summer, and they hadn't progressed. They had stopped. And for 2 or 3 years, I went back to that block and continued to look at it, and I saw no more advance of that disease. The oozing that comes about as a result of that disease from the sap coming out of the tree had totally stopped. The infections had dried up. It was pretty remarkable and quite untypical of what we would have expected for commercial cherry orchard that was so badly infected.
That's very exciting and inspiring, and it's something that we need to work to try to understand better and then try to replicate, because there's so much that we don't know about how these bacterial populations or soil profile can impact tree health. There's still a lot of homework to be done for sure. What is a book or a resource that you would recommend to growers most often?
There's a new cherry book that has just come out in the last year. It replaced one that was published in the 1990s, and so this is an updated version of that book called Cherries: Botany, Production, and Uses. And the publisher is CABI, CABI. It's been written by cherry scientists all over the world. And so there's everything that you ever wanted to know about cherries and a whole lot more that are included in this book. And so if you're serious about, cherry production, especially if you're a commercial grower, I would certainly recommend this book for them, because it goes in depth in a wide range of areas. It basically covers the science of cherry production, what we know today. And since it's so new, it's going to be up to date. It's going to give you the answers to the questions as we understand them today. And I think that this is probably one of the best resources for serious producers of cherries. For another resource, is my website. And I have numerous extension publications on that website that talk about things like establishing orchards. There is a publication on bacterial canker. There's a publication on rootstocks, training systems, varieties, how to prune cherry trees. So there's just a lot of information there as well.
What is your website, Lynn?
It is extension.oregonstate.edu. And that brings you up to the main page. You can select from that point. Let's see, you probably want to go a little bit further. So let's do a /WASCO, WASCO, and then /horticulture. And that will bring you directly to my website.
Okay, perfect. And for those of you listening, we will include this link in the podcast description, so you'll be able to click on it and go there directly. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet.
Lynn, what is a question that you wish I would have asked, or a topic that you wish we would have talked about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, maybe, what I see as the future of cherry production, where cherry production is going in the future, where that it's not right now. And so if you want to ask me that question, I'll try to answer that.
Well, it sounds like you may have asked it, and that is, I'm personally very interested in thinking about the future of fruit and vegetable production. I think there's so many interesting things happening right now, both in the areas of technology, with new sensors being developed, with being able to sense what is happening in the fields, collect a lot more data than we're able to at this point, and hopefully data that we can make decisions from. There's many new things happening with robotics that I think could really change how fruit is grown in the future. And then, of course, there's also many things that you were describing, better understanding of the entire ecosystem, that there's so much new information and new knowledge being developed that it really is a very exciting time when you think about when you bring all of those three pieces together and you start thinking about what the future might look like. It can be very exciting or very daunting, depending on your perspective. So I guess, what do you think the future looks like? What are the big drivers that you see emerging?
Well, and I think that you're right. I think that it can be both exciting and daunting. And I think one of the big issues that we have to deal with in the future, and we're starting to deal with it right now and have for the last decade or so, is labor shortage, general labor shortage in agriculture. A lot of our labor in our commercial cherry orchards in the United States are Mexican laborers. And these are people that are extremely hardworking people that come. Some of them live here in the cherry industry regions year round. Some of them come up from California or other places and pick our cherries. We've got the best cherry pickers in the world, and I say that with no hesitation. There's no other region in the world that can even come close to harvesting cherry trees as efficiently and as quickly as our cherry pickers that we use here in the Pacific Northwest, and actually the entire West Coast area of the nation. But there are new opportunities that are coming to the Mexican laborers that we have relied on for so many decades. They're going into manufacturing, construction. They're looking for other opportunities. Their children are not necessarily wanting to get into agriculture. And of course, all the border issues are affecting the industry as well. And so I think that one of the huge hurdles that we've got to overcome here in the next relatively few years is how are we going to get our cherries off of the trees with a shortage of labor. And one of the things that we've been looking at are ways of mechanically harvesting cherries. We have looked at developing new training systems that will allow the cherries to fall off of the trees without impacting other branches and getting damaged in that way. We've looked at breeding cherries that have a weak stem attachment. When you shake the tree or when you strike the tree with a plunger or a piston, the cherries will readily drop from the trees. And so, and we've also looked at the acceptance of stem-free cherries by the consumer. Will the consumer accept a cherry that does not have a stem. And what we found when we've done some market analysis is that, yes, for the most part, consumers will accept that as a product, and that there may be some advantages to a stem-free cherry. And so I really think that in the not too distant future, this is one of the directions that the industry will have to take. And I think that we are already looking for some solutions to these problems, and it's not too far in the future.
Lynn, when you visualize an orchard of the future in 20 years from now, what does that orchard look like to you in your mind's eye?
So I think that we're going to be moving away from freestanding trees. You know, if you have ever seen a cherry tree growing in the backyard, you know that it's a massive branches. It's tall. There are branches that go one way, branches that go another way. We've got to simplify that architecture. We've got to train those branches to go exactly where we want them to go. And so through some work done by Dr. Matt Whiting of Washington State University, Dr. Greg Lang of Michigan State University, they've developed a training system that is called an upright fruiting offshoots training system that basically is a trellis system that comes up from the ground. This is a wide trellis, so it comes up from the ground, and then it comes out two different angles that allow the light to come down from the top and allows cherries, if they are being grown on this system, to drop freely to a platform without impacting other branches. And so I think that the orchard in the future will have a system develop something like this, where we will go into that orchard with a machine that will strike the tree, the cherries will drop from the tree, and then go directly into a bin from that point, and then be taken to the packing house. This is a huge advancement just in the last 10 years. Most of the packing houses now are optically sorted. So for every cherry that goes over the line, they're going over at a speed that you can barely see, but multiple pictures are being taken of that cherry, and those cherries that have defects are being thrown out. Those cherries that are softer than what you would want are being thrown out. And so in this way, we are able to continue to produce high quality fruit for the consumers without as much labor as we've had in the past, where that labor is not going to be available in the future. And so we're having to adapt significantly. And all of this has been made possible by going back to our initial discussion about dwarfing rootstocks and training systems and varieties, by adopting new dwarfing rootstocks and training systems and varieties that allow us to grow trees that are smaller, that are managed differently, so that we grow them in a new system that allows for mechanical harvest, that are put through a packing house that is mechanically sorted.
That provides an image for, I can see very clearly where in the future we can have an agriculture and fruit production and cherry production where the environment and the ecosystem can really be optimized for the tree and can be optimized for the machines that will be interacting and working with those trees rather than with people, which could make for a very different appearing orchard than what we're used to today, for certain.
Yes, totally different than what we have been using or has been developed and are being grown by growers right now. As different and maybe even more different than how the orchards have changed in the last 30 years.
Wow. Exciting times.
Yeah.
Lynn.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and experience with our listeners. Thank you very much for being here. We are very honored, and we look forward to having you back possibly at some point in the future. I
would look forward to that. Thank you so much, John.
Thanks, Lynn.
This podcast was brought to you by a great company that I work for, AEA, Advancing Eco-Agriculture, the leader in regenerative agriculture since 2006. At AEA, we believe in challenging the status quo to find more profitable and regenerative ways to grow crops. We also believe that healthy plants are resistant to pests and disease, and that to grow healthy plants, we must first think different about agriculture, about empowering life instead of suppressing life, about regeneration versus degeneration. To achieve this, we formulate and sell products that help growers produce higher quality yield with less risk of crop failure. In short, we help growers make more money with less risk. Thank you for listening.